Welcome to week 5 of our Lent series, Christ Beyond the Church. We've looked at various different aspects of the, the cosmic Christ and the work of the cross beyond the church. We looked first at Jesus and the Pharisees, Christ and the church, and how Jesus' approach to the Pharisees may be mirrored today, perhaps, in the cosmic Christ's attitude towards the institutional church in certain areas. And then we looked at that passage in John, the way, the truth, and the life. And perhaps it's not quite what you think. Perhaps actually it's not about eternal life. It's not about getting to heaven. It's about something more, something different. Then we looked at the work of the cross as the reconciliation of all things and all things being one, being made one in the cosmic Christ. And then last time we looked at the idea that love supersedes the law, looking at the parables of the prodigal son and the Good Samaritan to show that if your religious doctrines and dogma bring you to a place that is in conflict with unconditional love, then you always, according to Jesus' teaching, follow love. This week, we are looking at Christ beyond Christian confines. And I'll unpack that a little in a short while. But we're going to begin with a moment of quiet and stillness and allowing ourselves to arrive in this space, to just be. To begin by ensuring that your physical self is comfortable, that you are rested and relaxed. Just take a moment to scan through your body to ensure that all of the muscles from your toes to your head are relaxed. Breathe gently. Breathe easily. Draw your mind's focus in on your breath, blowing in and out of your body. In your mind, set aside all other things. Nothing else matters in these moments. You have given yourself permission to be here, present in this place. Breathe gently for a few moments. On the stillness, just draw to mind your concept of Christ. Who is Christ to you? With this image of Christ in your mind, be aware that this is just like seeing someone through a keyhole as you peer in with your eye pressed up against the keyhole and they passed by in that moment. That is your concept of Christ, the Christ you see through the keyhole. So small in comparison to the reality of the cosmic Christ. Christ goes beyond all of your concepts. So in this stillness, we come to this idea of Christ beyond the confines of Christianity. In scriptures, we have three occasions, twice in the Old Testament and once in the New Testament, where God uses people God should not have used, where God works in and through people from other faiths than the one that is God's own faith, the Jewish faith. In the Old Testament, we have the story of Balaam, a soothsayer brought in to speak against Israel, and he finds that all he can do is speak the words of Yahweh. God speaks through Balaam. Then we have the interaction between King Saul and the witch from Endor, which I always think sounds like something from Middle-earth, the witch of Endor. Uh, um, but Saul goes to see the witch, to summon the soul and spirit of Samuel, who was dead. This is a form of necromancy. summoning the soul and the spirit of the dead through a witch. And the soul of Samuel appears. The soul of Samuel appears through the works of the Witch of Endor under the guidance of God. Then in the New Testament, we have one of my favorite parts of one of the stories in the New Testament. Now, of course, at the moment we're in Lent, we're in a lead up to Easter. But in Advent, there is a story, or a nativity, there is a story, or part of the nativity story holds an incredible experience. One of my favorite parts of it, I mentioned this in my book, Celtic Advent, the 40-day devotional, daily devotional leading up to Christmas. One of my favorite parts in the nativity story is when God uses people he should not have used. Like Balaam and the Witch of Endor, God uses magi to speak into this story. Magi, as I mentioned in the Celtic Advent book, are people probably, if you look at how the Midrash and the Talmud, the two paracanonical uh, pieces of writings of the Jewish faith, if they speak of the Magi and they say that Magi is pretty much exclusively used as a word for the priests of the Zoroastrian belief system in Persia, which of course is east of the Holy Lands. So these Magi, which is of course where we get the word magic from and magicians, these Magi use the divining of stars and planets, and of course in those days there was no difference between, or there was no separation within astronomy and astrology. It was all woven together. There wasn't any sense of going, oh no, these were just astronomers, they were just looking at the stars. No, no, no. Astrology and astronomy were woven together in those days. These were magicians using the stars and the planets to divine the future. These were the wise men of a Zoroastrian belief system, a different belief system to the Jews. Now, of course, there were wise men or wise people in the Jewish culture, in the Jewish faith, in the time of Jesus, in the vicinity, which could have and should have been used by God. Two of them are mentioned, Anna and Simeon, in the nativity story. They go to the temple, as Mary and Joseph go to the temple, and they see Anna and Simeon, both of whom are described in the wisdom tradition. He was a wise man, Simeon, and a wise woman, Anna, who were in the Jewish tradition, were revered by their own people, were in the location where Jesus was born, and yet God chooses to bring in these people who see the future through the stars, who predict that this king, this divine king, is going to be born, and are so convinced of their prediction through the stars that they travel to discover Jesus. And when they speak into this story, in the hearing of Mary and Joseph, the Bible tells us that Mary stored these things in her heart. She took the gifts and she stored their words in her heart. This is God working beyond the confines of God's own religion, or the religion that this God is related to, this, at this point, Jewish religion. Later on, we also have a story in the New Testament of the Apostle Paul talking to some Greek philosophers and a town in a Greek context about the unknown God, about a God who is not one of the Greek gods, this statue, this plinth to the unknown God. And Paul says, I know this God. This is the Jewish God. This is my God. This is the one that, Christ is. And people listen, the Greeks listen to Paul about this unknown God, about the one that Paul knows. So already we have two stories from the Old Testament, two stories from the New Testament, where God is working in cultures and in belief systems and in religions that are not God's own. Or perhaps they are, because perhaps all people belong to God in the sense of everyone is a child of God, everyone is made with the divine image within them. So Christ, as an extension of this God, the cosmic Christ, perhaps just continues this same theme, this same process, this same working. Perhaps actually there are no confines to the cosmic Christ. Perhaps we are the ones who put the confines on the work of the divine. Perhaps we are the ones that box in where we think God can work, how we think God can work, where we think God should work, where we think God should be doing that God stuff, with whom God should be doing that God stuff, where the divine should be working, who the divine should be working in. Perhaps it's us and only us that puts the confines around this. There's uh, a fantastic guy, an artist on social media that I follow. His social media handle is the Naked Pastor, and he draws these beautiful little illustrations about various different things. And one of the illustrations of his that I like um, is a bunch of people drawing a grid with giant pencils. They're on the floor and they're drawing a grid with giant pencils. Loads of people around on this pad. And in the midst of it is this figure that represents Jesus, who obviously looks like Jesus, because Naked Pastor has a particular Jesus figure that he always draws in the same way in all of his cartoons. And this Jesus figure has one of these giant pencils, but he's got his upside down, of course, to everybody else, because everybody else is drawing these lines, this grid, and Jesus is there. He's got the rubber end of his pencil and the eraser end of his pencil on the floor, scribbling out or rubbing out these lines. And it is our construction of the grid lines that create the confines that the cosmic Christ does not sit within. You see, the cosmic Christ doesn't sit within, the divine does not sit within the confines that we construct. The illustration that I used during the meditation about seeing Christ through a keyhole is something that's taken from Meister Eckhart, a 14th century German Dominican mystic, one of my favorite Christian mystics, Meister Eckhart, who talked about seeing God through a keyhole when he was talking about our concepts of God, what the divine is according to us. And he said, we see God as if we're looking through a keyhole, as if we're just spying through this little hole, and all we can see is straight through this keyhole. That's how we view God in this very tiny, tiny space. As God passes by, past where we can see. And that's our concept of God. But as we know, if we're peering at someone through the keyhole, we only see a very brief moment and perhaps not even the fullness of that person. And the room is so much bigger. And the movements of that person inside the room is so much greater than we can see through this keyhole. So this illustration that Meister Eckhart uses about our concepts of the divine being like we have seen God through a keyhole tell us that actually our concepts of the divine are really quite inadequate compared to the enormity of the ineffable cosmic reality. In fact, Meister Eckhart is famed for praying the prayer, God, rid me of God. This is a cry from the heart from Meister Eckhart that the ineffable divine reality that is beyond the concepts and confines of our understanding would rid him of his concept of who God is. Because when we have a concept, we limit the reality that we can experience. Once we've decided that God is this or God is like this, then we limit the reality of the experience we can have of the great cosmic ineffable reality that is the divine. And God shows this through pockets, little stories in the Christian scriptures, the Judaic Christian scriptures, where God says, here's your expectation. You think I will work like this. You think I will speak through my people. Well, let's give a little shake up of that. And I'm going to go and speak through these people instead. I'm going to speak through Balaam. I'm going to speak through this witch in the mountains. I'm going to speak through the magicians, the magi, the priests of Zoroastrianism. I'm going to speak into this culture here. And they're not even going to know who I am. They're just going to know that there's a God. And what if the confines that we create limit other people too? What if the confines that we call Christianity is just our keyhole? What if there is something beyond Christianity that resides in the divine reality, in the cosmic Christ? What if the cosmic Christ is beyond all the confines of all the aspects of Christianity? It's a very interesting thought process. What if the cosmic Christ doesn't fit into the confines of Christianity? What if it's more? What if we are the ones drawing the grid lines and the cosmic Christ is rubbing them all out so that we can be one with each other? So that the reconciliation of all things is not having to struggle through the divisions that we create. Because unity cannot come through divisions. And the confines that we create divisions. Because if you create a confine, then there is the people that fit inside it and the people who are outside it. There is therefore an us and a them. That is not reconciliation. That is not unity. That is not one. So what if the idea that every human being is made in a divine image means that the connection is there, irrespective of which name or label you put on it? What a question. God wasn't bound by these confines. God isn't bound by these confines. Should we be bound by these confines? Now, don't get me wrong. I think having structure and having boundaries and things is useful for us. I think because we know we can't understand and connect with the ineffable reality of the cosmic Christ or the cosmic reality of the divine, we need to have something we can grasp, some concept we can grasp. So having a concept of the divine that we can grasp is a useful thing, provided, again, something else that Meister Eckhart said and other mystics, provided we understand that our concept of God is just our concept of God and not God in totality in the God self. And therefore, our concept of God and someone else's concept of God might be different, but it doesn't mean that one's right and one's wrong. And we can see this within churches themselves, because there's so many different elements of theology in churches themselves uh, who God is, what God is like, how God behaves, what's the connection, how do we connect? So many different elements of theology that differ in all the different streams of church. But Christ works beyond the confines of Christianity because God is God and God has always been God and God is the same God. So if God did it in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, he's doing it now. God is the divine beyond all our concepts, including the he that I keep mentioning. There is no masculinity in God. I use the term he because there is a need for some sense of pronoun, and I don't like using they all the time unless I'm talking about the Godhead, which is the Trinity. In elements of God, there needs to be some sense of pronoun. But that doesn't mean that I think that there's a masculinity in God. Quite the opposite. I think God is totally beyond the bounds of any kind of gender context, even a they context. It still confines it to our understanding of gender pronouns. God is beyond all of our concepts of what God is and who God is, what God's like, how God behaves. Theologically speaking, this comes under the remit of apophatic theology, that is, the unknowing of God. See, now we go through a process we should go through a process in our spiritual journey from not knowing to knowing and then to unknowing. This is a process from not knowing who God is, perhaps not even knowing God, not believing in God, to a process or a stage of knowing God. We come to realize there is a divine reality, and we choose a divine reality which to follow, and the theology that we want to hook in with, whether we Catholics, Orthodox, Protestant, and the various different forms and streams of Protestantism. And then we learn about this God in the ways or whatever God we are looking at. And then we're supposed to go into the unknowing, the third stage, which is a little bit like the not knowing, but it comes after the knowing. So it's not knowing, it's after knowing, so it's unknowing. So we get to create this idea of who God is and what God is like. And that's our belief system. But then we go, actually, God is beyond this. And I need to deconstruct the concepts that I have of God. This is a normal, healthy process. Apophatic theology has been part of Christian theology since at least the fourth and fifth century, where Dionysius, the Areopagite, or Pseudo Dionysius, the Areopagite, wrote about this. It was almost definitely something that was part of our theology beyond that, going back in history, in Christian history. This unknowing of God going, my concepts are limited, so I have to remove my concepts. Otherwise, it limits my experience of the cosmic divine reality. And only then, when we go through to the unknowing of God, where we remove and get rid of and find a detachment in the concepts we had of God, and we are deconstructed in our confining constructs, can we begin to experience the enormity of the divine reality? If you still have a very firm concept of who God is, and you cannot live in the reality of the divine, cosmic, ultimate reality. You have to let go of all of your concepts of who God is, if you are truly going to be able to experience the cosmic divine reality. Christ is beyond the confines of Christianity. So we're going to spend a bit of time now just in meditation, in contemplative silence. I'm going to mute uh, myself as well. And we're simply going to contemplate our concepts of who God is. And then in our own time, we're going to let them go, release them, become detached from our concepts of who God is. And then we'll come back. as we draw to a close in our contemplations, just before I bring my concluding thoughts, let's bring up a virtual collection plate page. These are free talks over Lent, but if you wanted to uh, give a donation towards the ongoing work of Waymark Ministries and what I do, then it would be wonderful if you would scan with your smart code the QR code here. If you're using your phone to watch this video on YouTube, then you can go to our website, the link in the description of the video, and either find the QR codes or find a way to donate to Waymark Ministries. So we've contemplated the question, who is Christ to me, basically? What is my concept of the divine, the cosmic Christ? Am I prepared to be and to live in the reality that this concept is a very limited concept? Actually, who I think God is not who God is, it's just who I think God is. And the reality of God is bigger, bigger than any of us can comprehend. We don't know God. We can never know God. We can only catch a glimpse of God through that keyhole, that metaphorical keyhole. That is the concept of God we have at this moment. So that's the concept of God I can live with. That's the concept of God I can relate to. But I must know that that is just the concept of God. It is not God. Christ is beyond the confines of my Christian concepts. The cosmic Christ is beyond that. Scripture shows that the divine moves beyond the confines of the religion that is found in the Judaic Christian scriptures. So our concept must be bigger. Our understanding that the divine is bigger than any concept we can have. It is more. It is more. It is more. So as we come close now to the Easter period, where absolutely the incarnation of the divine as Jesus, the cosmic Christ in a body, as the Apostle John describes it in the beginning of his gospel, came down to be one with us, comes to the point of the cross in that incarnation of the life as Jesus. We allow our concepts to be let go, to be unknown. We do the unknowing of God. Yes, that moment in time had a cosmic effect. The action of that incarnation of the cosmic Christ as Jesus on the cross had a cosmic effect. We know that Christ is beyond these things. In our next and final Lent talk for this year, 2025, we'll be looking at, I've entitled it DVD Easter eggs. I was going to just entitle it Easter eggs with the idea of the DVD bit in there, but obviously Easter eggs at Easter kind of has a different connotation. If you don't know what a DVD Easter egg is, it's hidden things in DVDs and programs and things. They're called Easter eggs because you have to hunt for them. And it's discovering the hidden things. That's what next The next session will be the final session, discovering the hidden things. I look forward to sharing that with you. Please join us at that. If you've missed it already, then the YouTube video is there. But I would love to see you on the last Monday before Easter, the Monday of Holy Week, to discover the hidden things. Bless you, and may you have a wonderful week.